Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta podcast. We have a new president in the White House. Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th president of the United States on January 20th, with Kamala Harris as the vice president. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about the key question: what impact a Biden presidency is going to have on India. Joining me in this discussion are Sunanda Vashisht, who is an author, columnist, and a popular voice on social media. She's based in the US and has testified to the US government authorities on matters related to Kashmir earlier. Thanks so much for joining us, Sunandaji.
Thank you so much.
Right. We also have Abhishek Paul, who is a chartered accountant by profession. He also has a keen interest on politics, policy, economy, and sport. You've heard him on more than a couple of our Bharatvaarta podcasts as well. Thank you for joining us, Abhishek.
Hi, Kai. Hi, everyone.
And finally, to round off this lineup, we have Aashish Chandorkar. Aashish is an author and columnist. He's one of our most popular commentators on politics and policy, and Poha also. Welcome, Aashish.
Thanks, Kari.
So I guess we'll begin with you, Sunandaji. We have a new presidency in the US. How do you see the Biden administration approach changing with respect to India? Do you think that it will change significantly?
Yeah, we do have a new president in the White House, and after much drama that happened, and he's firmly in the White House now. And Biden presidency, as I call it Obama 3.0. Joe Biden, as everyone knows, was President Obama's vice president. He continues from there. In between, it was an aberration. President Trump was neither a Republican nor a Democrat. He was not a career politician. He was someone who was totally an outsider who came, and he did attract, a huge constituency in the wake, and that's what won him his first term. He had about 70 million votes in the second election also, second round which he ran and which he lost. But so there was a significant constituency for him, mainly Republican constituency, mainly people who are tired of what globalization has done to them. So these were not really, besides traditional Republican voters, he also had a lot of other people who were tired of their jobs being sent out, or who were not happy with the quality of their lives. So that was his constituency, but that was not necessarily a Republican or a Democrat constituency. Be that as may be, now we are back to a career politician in the White House. We are back to what I call somebody who is dependent on institutions and institutional memory. That was very different from Trump. He never worried about institutions. He never worried about what was, the institutional memory, as we say. This one will go back to that. He has a whole coterie of people who have been in politics, who have been in policy making for a long time. So we won't see any tweet storms. We won't see any haphazard actions. We won't see any, I don't think any NATO member or anybody has to wake up in the morning and check tweets and see what happened. So that there is a break in that. There will be a less, this presidency is not going to be on steroids in that sense, but it's going to be back to what United States was in Obama era. Your question was specifically about India, and I know there is a lot of worry in India about Biden presidency and about Democrats especially, since this is not Biden, this Democrat party is not what Clinton Democrats were, the Democrats we were used to. And at that time, it didn't really matter, a Clinton president or somebody, we had run-ins with them, but we were never too worried about anybody. That sort of has been a worry because this president has come into the White House with the support of progressives. This progressives is a new element that has risen in the Democrat Party, and they are known as Squad. These are far, far left Democrats, and Biden himself is a centrist. So it remains to be seen how he governs domestically and on foreign policy. My sense is, even though it is very early to say how he will govern on in the domestic front, there the Squad might have some give and take since they have supported him to come into presidency. But on foreign policy, I don't see that happening as yet. I don't think India has anything to worry, not because we are depending on the largesse or big-heartedness of Joe Biden, but simply because what India brings to the table now. India is a huge democracy on its own, a huge market, and despite what pandemic has ravaged India, the economic forecast is extremely good. And then the China factor, we are the only bulwark against China on the table right now. So for their own sake, Biden has no choice but to engage with India on the terms more or less that will be in India's favor and that will be set by India. We will see a lot. Now, first of all, I also want to end this opening comment by a small thing saying this point that please, the serious commentators in India need to understand that Twitter's firestorm is very different from policy making, and we need to be able to distinguish the two. So in Biden presidency, we'll see a lot of needling being done, which is already being done, and I'm sure we'll get to it later. You will see a lot of needling being done, but that is not essentially done by people who are in the establishment. They may be close to the establishment, but these are not people who have any voice in determining the policy. So yes, they will keep a lot of our media busy. They will keep a Chatrati busy. They will keep the social media influencers busy. But will that affect the policy? I have serious doubts it won't. And we have already seen it in farm laws. The White House or the State Department communication that came out, they have openly supported the farm laws and of course they've said about human rights and all that, but that is, that's normal that any democracy will say. But overall, I don't see a whole shift. Expect Obama 3.0.
So it's a reversion to the mean in many ways, is what you're saying, right? And, again, you touched upon this lightly, but how much of a sway will the likes of AOC and others have, there haven't really been those kind of appointments as well, right? So do you think
Exactly. No, that's a very important point. You have to say everybody was worried that they were going to charge their pound of flesh because that's how politics works. If I support you, you need to be giving us some pound of flesh. But I haven't seen any of those appointments in the top ranking places. So I don't see that they're going to have too much impact. Yes, they'll be very noisy. But in the end, how is the policy going to be determined? I doubt it's going to be, it's going to impact them. Besides, the noise can be handled. And behind the scene, and this is what is one good thing about Biden, the noise need not necessarily also cloud the policy. The noise and policy will be separated, unlike Trump presidency.
Right. So Abhishek, foreign policy is of course, very strategic and, tactical and stuff, right? But do you see that, Prime Minister Modi's perceived closeness with President Trump, the former President Trump, affect any of these India-US relationships?
So on this, I would say that I will say that we will probably not see, signature events such as what was held in, let's say, Houston or Ahmedabad between Prime Minister Modi and Joe Biden. I think those kind of, or even earlier in, PM Modi's term, right? When he probably visited a lot of those Silicon Valley, companies and all that, right? So there was that early enthusiasm during that phase. I think the relationship between these two administrations will be much more, business-like, right? You will probably not see the same kind of personal camaraderie and signature events happening. But the policy shift is less likely, I feel. I think there will be a lot of continuity in terms of India, basically because, as Sunanda ji said, right, we are a big counterfoil to China. And right now, I think the administration's two main objectives are, one, to get their own house in order, right, their domestic policy, and then when they look outside, they're looking firstly at China, right? So in these two things, I think India will sort of see a continuity in terms of policy. But yes, the sort of rhetoric that you see and the expectation that is there in sort of liberal circles in both India and US, that you'll get a lot of comments and admonishment of this current administration. I think on and off, you will see certain statements being made which have terms like human rights and democracy and dissent and allowing protests. I think those are to be expected, but whether those, I don't think just now you would see any sort of downstream effect of those statements, right? In terms of, if people are thinking that there'll be sanctions tomorrow from the US on these issues, I think that is far-fetched. You could see sanctions possibly on the one thing, which is the missile deal, S-400 deal with Russia, right? And one thing to note is that this Democrat Party has to appear that it is sort of very strong on Russia, because that's the story they have been telling for the last 4 years of the Trump administration, right? So that is one thing where the whole CATSA sort of thing, where any deal with Russia could lead to potential sanctions. I think the Trump administration started on that on Turkey, right, who were doing a similar weapons deal with Russia. So that is something to be watched out. I think, you had people like Jeff Smith on Twitter commenting recently that possibility of such sanctions is there, but that will not derail the whole India-US relationship. But that's something to watch out for, is what I would say.
Right. So Ashish, let's take a step back and look at the history of the US-India relationship as well. Has there been a difference, between how the Democrats and the Republicans have treated us?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. Historically, the Indian community in US has been very democratic friendly. I mean, they've always been part of, their politics is quite aligned with what the Dems did. I think there's a little bit of a history to that. So let's rewind all the way back to how the Indo-US relationship started after the independence, right? So like Prime Minister Nehru had visited the US when Harry Truman was the president. And in the very first visit, he said that India will be non-aligned. Like, he made that proclamation very clear, right? So that kind of set the tone for the relations, where Pakistan then became centerpiece to US's foreign policy, and India kind of lost out eventually, over the years. Then the first president to visit India was like in 1959. So we had a very slow start. Like, it took 12 years for a Republican president to visit India when President Eisenhower came to Delhi and addressed the parliament. But again, it did not lead to any great thaw in the relations per se. Although in the 1962 war against China, and President John F. Kennedy supported India largely. He even provided arms assistance, and they were ready to intervene basically if need be, if that was the situation. So, but also around that time, mid 60s, the US policy then started moving towards let's say they became more China focused, and there was this theme that China should be starting 1967, basically, that China should be propped up, and they should ally with China and so on, right? So I think that theme then became prominent, which kind of started affecting the Indo-US relationships. Although I think the peak probably came when Norman Borlaug came to India, who was one of the food agroeconomist, food scientist, who kind of helped India run the Green Revolution. So that was probably the pinnacle of that decade, and I think that happened under a Democrat president. So some of the early wins the early positives came under the Democrats, and then after that, once India went to war with Pakistan in the Nixon era in '71, US was completely with Pakistan at that point of time, right? And in fact, there are stories, and I think we covered this in one of the episodes, Roshan, with Adat and Mohal Joshi, how this could have actually become like a world war in itself, but it did not, thankfully, because both Russia and US were willing to intervene on respective sides. But then Nixon, who was a Republican, actually then took the policy towards Pakistan, and which kind of exacerbated with the nuclear test in '74, where that led to kind of sanctions, etc. And I think that was in my mind, that was I think the transition point or the tipping point. Although, I mean, President Carter, who was a Democrat, did visit India after the nuclear test, but I think that was a time when the whole world moved towards non-proliferation and so on. India did not join in, and that was like a focal point of the relationships for like almost 20-25 years after that, right? Until the Vajpayee government, which also faced sanctions, by the way, and we'll come to that. And I think the only thaw again came when Reagan was the president. Indira Gandhi engaged him well. Rajiv Gandhi engaged him well. There's this famous photograph of Reagan holding an umbrella for Rajiv Gandhi walking in the White House, right? So I think there was this brief moment, although unfortunately it came after the Union Carbide tragedy, which led to a lot of diplomatic row between the two countries. And God knows what really transpired in that meeting. There are so many theories about Rajiv Gandhi's meeting with Reagan at that point of time. But I think barring that short phase, maybe 4 or 5 years where things were kind of normalized, I think the whole negativity which surrounded the Indian nuclear test from 1974, and then Carter getting the world to sign the NPT, I think that has continued. That continued for a long, long time, and I think that continued through '98. Actually, like when India did the second test, and as we know, US imposed a lot of sanctions. Again, Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat, was the president then. So there was a lot of up and down, although on the net side, maybe till 2000. And I mean, Clinton did come to India in 2000, the first president to visit after Carter in '78. So I think the Democrats did take more initiative, although they also caused a lot of grief in terms of the sanctions for both the nuclear tests. But I think on the balance, it was seen that the Democrats were friendlier, and I think probably that's Nixon's legacy, because Reagan's intervention couldn't undo what Nixon did in 1971 in terms of the perception that Democrats were closer and Republicans were not. I think the break really came after 2001, when George W. Bush when he took over in 2000. So first thing he did was he lifted the sanctions, right? Like he lifted the sanctions in 2001, a couple of years after they were imposed. India then signed the General Security of Military Information Agreement, GSOMIA, which was signed in 2002 between the Vajpayee government and the Bush administration. I think that really laid the foundation of the modern era relationship. And I think some of it was also driven by the fact that the technology business made it very imperative that the countries work together. I mean, India was like a prime partner for the US technology firm. So there were business interests also which were aligning. What also aligned with for us, I mean, it may not have gone well for the world, but what aligned well for us was that Bush administration focused a lot on wars in Asia, in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. And that kind of gave, let's say, a lot of the terror elements which were operating in Kashmir probably got diverted for a few years. So we actually got a breathing room with the Bush administration there. So it may not have been deliberate, but I would say that the real tipping point came under a Republican president with Bush, and I think he followed it up. I mean, if you see the decade of Bush, there was this India-US defense agreement. The landmark civil nuclear deal happened. It was drafted in 2005 and then got signed in 2008 after a great drama in Indian Parliament. President Bush visited India in 2006. where and then of course Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited twice in his term. He was there once to meet President Bush and once to meet President Obama. India also, there also this feel good factor, like we did this mangoes for Harley Davidson type of a deal where we promised to reduce duties on the motorcycles by US allowing the exports of mangoes from India. And I think the whole, Chandrayaan, for example, that was another classic example of a collaboration on a technical level where the NASA had actually got a couple of probes part of Chandrayaan, which later on discovered water on the surface of the moon, water droplets. So I think all of that basically really created a good operating equation through the term of President Bush. And I think President Obama actually continued that process. He genuinely took a bipartisan approach to how he viewed the ties with India. I think that was a very interesting, let's say, continuity. And I think, as we see maybe the departure, that kind of led to the theory that there's a bipartisan agreement in the US. But again, it's only 20 years old. That bipartisan agreement wasn't really there before Bush took over. Of course, in the Obama times, things went off well. He invited PM Modi to the US when he took over. As we know, under Bush administration, CM Modi was denied a visa to visit US. So as such, I think that kind of, this actually, as you know, was one of the talking points, right, through the campaign of 2014, where some 66 of our lawmakers had written to the US administration to do something about the impending win of BJP in 2014. So I think that kind of got undone under Obama, which was like a good positive sign. US, like Abhishek said, Prime Minister Modi went to the US. He had this rock star reception in Madison Square Garden, and it was on September 2014, right? So I think that was pretty early in the tenure. And then, of course, President Obama visited India for the Republic Day, right? In that visit, if you remember, a lot of media, both on the US side and Indian side, tried to provoke him about statements about human rights and civil liberties and religious freedom and all of that. And I think barring one remark which he made in a joint presser, he did not really get into too much of the nitty-gritty of admonishing India and PM Modi as the press was expecting. So I think that the fact that we navigated the Obama presidency years was actually quite interesting. Things kind of looked up and they continued to be very positive. In fact, around that time, there was a US-India defense agreement signed again between Ashton Carter, who was the Secretary of Defense then, and Manohar Parrikar, who was our Raksha Mantri. So then Obama recognized India as a major defense partner, which was quite unique at that point of time. And then, of course, President Trump took over in 2016. And his approach, as Sunanda said, was very transactional. For him, everything was a deal, right? And what he said versus what it did versus what he tweeted never had any consistency in terms of what really he was thinking. And of course, on some fronts, he was bad. Like, for example, on H-1B, the whole liberalization which President Obama brought in terms of the employment authorization directives for the spouses of H-1B workers, etc. I think some of that was kind of rolled back during the Trump times. Even now, there is a presidential ban on visa processing in India, or actually from most countries right now. So people cannot travel that freely to US right now, which kind of continues from his legacy. But I think the most important part, or the most important legacy of the Trump administration for India, was his fight with China. I think he really recognized that there has to be a China break. And while President Obama also had his own tiffs with China, but really it was only in the last 4 or 5 years that US and China have, US has recognized China as a competitor and a potential disruptor and a challenger to its power, to its hegemony, especially on the geopolitical issues. And I think that really helped us indirectly in a big way. Be it on trade or be it on, defense agreements. We signed these 3 defense agreements called COMCASA, LEMOA, and BECA during the Trump times. In fact, the last one was signed just 5 days before the US election. So that showed how keen US was to really close it, because probably President Trump, knew that he was going to lose, etc. And some of these open items were closed in the last weeks of his administration. So as such, while he also needed India in terms of taking away the special trade status and so on. But overall, the last 20 years have been fairly okay for India-US relationships, bipartisan. But I think the credit for that probably goes to President Obama in terms of maintaining the continuity between Bush and Trump administrations. However, I am a little skeptical about what happens in the future. I mean, although Sunanda and Abhishek rightly pointed out that the trade and economics will play a big role, but I believe that it just seems a little different right now. I mean, the world seems much more charged up in terms of what happens on social media, the regular quibbles which are happening, and eventually someone is going to one day tag PM Modi or FM Jaishankar or Amit Shah, and I think it's going to escalate somewhere. I mean, it's not easy to control things on social media. So I'm a little skeptical. I'm not as positive right now about how things will evolve under the Biden administration. Maybe we will have to do the Trump thing, which is to become just transactional and focus only on a few things. Not worry about the larger, not assume that US will back us if China attacks us in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, etc. But cautiously optimistic, but let's say much less optimistic than Abhishek and Sunanda.
Right. Thanks, Aashish. That was a fairly comprehensive summary. So Sunanda ji, I mean, you've heard Aashish just say, right? I mean, that things could very well escalate, and those fears are, not totally unfounded as well. That some of these elements within the Democratic Party might have some impact as such. What do the early, what does the early political commentary there indicate as such? I mean, any really signals as such that things could go worse, or probably things will stay as is?
Yeah. That was a brilliant summary that Aashish gave, and I was, seeing where he would forget anything, but he didn't. He just made sure that he got everything right, except he forgot Kennedy. And I think JFK's role in 65 is very important, and in that 65 war. So we should probably mention the poor guy as well. I think President Kennedy's effort, because a lot of that is not known in India a lot, but the letters that he wrote to Nehru and all the letters that Nehru wrote to him and say about China, all that is in public domain now, that, what China was doing to us since 1962. Even though papers have not been declassified on our end, but those letters are quite significant, and how President Kennedy stopped that 1962 war from becoming a two-front war by telling Pakistan to back off, that really helped India. So India-United States relationship is such a yo-yo. I mean, it goes up and down, and you cannot say that under Democrats we do well or under Republicans we do well. It's a mixed bag, and we have done well here and there. And I give a huge credit to Indian diplomats. Honestly, I do, having seen them from very close quarters. And we love to say things about Babudam, and I love to say this too. But here, our diplomats have really, really worked hard. And even this statement that you have seen that came from State Department just 2 days ago, one should not forget that there are a lot of diplomats working behind all those things. You don't see things like that in public without a lot of back channel works going on. So yeah, that to say that. Your question is, what is the early commentary? Biden presidency for now is plagued with handling COVID. He has not had time for anything else. For example, commentators are waiting with bated breath to see what his China policy is going to be, because only when we know what is he going to do with China will we be able to infer what India's stand will be or what he will think about India. Because one big difference from Obama presidency and Biden presidency now will be what we achieved in Trump presidency was total dehyphenation of India and Pakistan, which was excellent for us, which is what we had wanted to do for a long time. But now even that we shouldn't really worry about. A lot of people are worried about hyphenation back with India and Pakistan, but that really shouldn't be our worry now, because now Pakistan is totally a client state of China. So it doesn't matter whether they hyphenate us or doesn't hyphenate us. The real thing is China. The real challenge really is China. And how Biden deals with China remains to be seen. He hasn't indicated that he will continue trade wars the way Trump did. There are also some, here and there we see some leaks coming from the government, nothing official yet, but the leaks coming from the government. They are willing to engage with China. One doesn't know what the levels of engagement will be, because China now isn't what it was in Obama presidency either. I mean, China is a power that has already risen, and we already know about Chairman Xi's ambitions. We know that China is not a sleeping dragon anymore. We know that they are not going to hide under, any kind of anything. They're not hiding at the moment. They're not giving anybody an impression that the dragon is sleeping. So my sense right now is that Biden himself does not know what he's going to do with China, because it has come out clearly. He won this election because he's not Trump. That is the only reason he won this election. So his policy is not very clear. And my sense is, if he goes on with engaging China beyond a point and giving in a little too much to them, then we have a problem. I'm not going to worry about what he does with Pakistan, but if he is going to engage a little bit too much with China, and if he's going to, the trade negotiations, or he's going to appease them a lot, I think at that point we have a problem, because for us, we have gone to a point of no return with China after Doklam and after what we are seeing even right now on our borders. So that will remain to be seen. Other than that, I think Biden presidency will be more about keeping us on tenterhooks rather than giving us, when Doklam happened, it was a huge relief for India that no US president talked about it, or nobody in US government talked about it and turned the other way. We were able to do what we were able to do. That's not going to happen. I mean, if we have a skirmish in the Himalayas right now with China, do expect White House to comment. But will they be able to do anything beyond commenting? I doubt it. Look at the Myanmar crisis. Now that the coup has happened, everybody knows that the China's hand in it, and everybody's waiting with bated breath to see what Biden will do. But other than those comments that we want democracy to be restored or anything, I haven't seen any admonishment for China. I haven't seen any even back channel negotiations. I haven't seen much going on. And I'm thinking this is also because he is, unlike India, which has done well in the pandemic now, United States is totally ravaged at the moment. Their economy is the way it is. The states and the center, there's public health crisis, huge public health crisis, and they have not known in last 100 years. They have not seen a public health crisis. They don't know how to do. They don't even know how to roll out a national inoculation program, vaccination program like we do in our sleep in India. So they don't even know these things because there is so much of decentralization. Every state and every county, everybody has their own plans. And what a public health crisis needs is a centralized focus on something that is missing in the United States at the moment. So I think this year is going to go with Biden mostly worried about the domestic constituency and handling COVID. On China, it remains to be seen what he is going to do. India has had a tremendous start with Biden, by the way. We have seen all the comments that have come so far. There have been engagements with Raksha Mantri has spoken to the Defense Secretary, and Minister Jaishankar, EM, spoke to Secretary of State. So all that conversations have started. All the conversations are thankfully happening. outside of social media. And I'm thinking that there are some mature people in the White House and in Pentagon and in Congress who will determine the policy. But do expect, for example, in Congress, Foreign Relations Committee calling people. And I just heard, in fact, right now on my phone, I just got a message that New York has officially called February 5th a Kashmir American Day. Things like that, those little pinpricks are going to happen. I mean, what does it mean in the overall picture? Nothing. I mean, a small state of New York calling, February 5th a Kashmir American Day means nothing in terms of policy. But look at the headlines that it will create now. Look at the headlines that it will generate. Look at the amount of stuff that people will have to say on the social media. So things like that, those pinpricks will keep happening. Unfortunately, we'll have to deal with that, and we will have to look beyond it and, focus on trade, focus on military cooperation, which is at its highest. And also, I want to spend 1 minute in thinking, give a shout out to India, irrespective of the government that has been in power. India has steadfastly said that we are not going to be Korea for the United States. We don't want to follow your definition of your allies are my allies and your friends are my friends and your enemies are my enemies. Even with that, even India is the only country that will deal with Russia and that will deal with Iran. And by the way, as Abhishek said, I don't see the waiver. I don't see even the nominal, sanctions coming. I think we will get a waiver one more time, not because of anything we have done, but because it's in America's interest that India receives a waiver in S-400 deal. So I think India has steadfastly told America that we will look out for our foreign policy ourselves.
Right.
For example, tomorrow, if America decides to invade Iran, America should have no impression that India is going to support it, because India won't. We have our millennial-old relationship with Iran. So to be able to communicate to the Western power that we are a civilizational country and we have an entire civilizational memory that will determine our relationship in the world is a huge benefit to India. And we are the only country that have been able to do it. We are able to, in 1 week, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an incident where the Indian Prime Minister met with or spoke with American Secretary of State and Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian president in 1 week. India is the only country that is able to do it. And we have the right to do it because we are not a country that was born in 1947. We have our own history and we have our own thing, and that is how we will deal with the world. And we will deal with United States on the issues of mutual interest. And those issues of mutual interest have now expanded a huge lot, and it's in our interest that we expand that list of mutual interests. But to think that post-Trump, post-COVID, post-pandemic, America will be able to tell the world that, my allies are your allies and my enemies are your enemies, and now you deal with me like that. It's not going to work with India anymore. And if there is American exceptionalism, I think White House better get used to the fact that there is something called Indian exceptionalism under Narendra Modi, and they will have to get used to that new normal as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so in many ways that Fox non-aligned status as such will kind of reach the apex in terms of like forming a third legit power center, right? I mean, India and maybe like few other states as well. So, Abhishek, you've just heard Sunanda ji talk about the fact that, the political dispensation in the US might have its hands full with the COVID and, let's say dealing with China, Russia, etc., right? But the media commentary there will continue to spout all kinds of things, right? I mean, what do you see the general sentiment as in the likes of, let's say, Washington Post or Huffington Post and those kinds?
Yeah, so I think over the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion in their own left-wing circles as to what should be a quote-unquote progressive foreign policy, right? What does that mean? And so I think it basically comes down to and they go back to their original intellectuals like Chomsky and all that, right? When they say that what should America do in the world, right? And I think one thing which is going to change slowly is that I think now both sides and the general American perception is that they don't want to get into foreign wars too much, right? I think the general emphasis on, or I would say the general public perception on both sides is that that they don't want to see too much military intervention anymore. So I think that's something that will be a change from the 2000, like Bush and even some of Obama's years, right, where what Trump kind of changed, right, as in he did not start any new wars and all that. I think there's a good chance that Biden will continue in that vein of not starting military engagements abroad. But the whole progressive foreign policy also talks about influencing people whom you can influence and make an impact. So they talk about policing your friends more than your enemies, right? Because that's where you have a sort of influence. So for example, you will see that firstly a lot more pressure on Israel, right, in terms of I think that you will see a breakaway of the whole Democratic Republican sort of consensus that was there in terms of the positive way in which Israel was looked at. I think Israel will probably be the first sort of country to bear this whole progressive approach of foreign policy. I mean, there are parts of the whole Democrat establishment which is very anti-Israel, right? There is the whole BDS movement, and those sort of wings of the Democrat Party, if not in power today, are slowly going to sort of start influencing, and you will see that. On the flip side, for example, Trump administration was much more strict on Iran, right? But you will see a reversion of that towards probably going back to the Obama years. And I think India will sort of, so the point is, I don't think India's foreign policies per se are kind of in too much conflict with the United States, right? Strategically, both of us are kind of in sync. So the big question mark then comes, so where is our concern? Where is, the whole discussion about? And the discussion is about India's domestic politics, right? And what is the whole, and there is a lot of commentary about that in the US. And I mean, the reasons are kind of obvious, right? Indians in America are disproportionately there in software sector. They're disproportionately there in the universities, in the media, right? So there is, and they're all on one side of the spectrum politically, right? Which happens to be on the other side of the current ruling administration in India, right? So you will see, I mean, a lot of stories about India in the media. We have been seeing that throughout. I mean, since 2014, I would say we've seen a dramatic increase in the sort of coverage, alarmist coverage, you could say, right, in the US media, and that will only increase. There is no reversion, I don't see any chance of that going to anything of a more sensible type in the near future. You will only see a lot more, hyping up of that. I mean, Ashish was saying that he thought I was more optimistic. I am not optimistic. I've kind of resigned that this is how it is, right? So, and we will
Status quo, more or less status quo.
moral status quo, and we'll have to just deal with it and sort of ignore it, right? We cannot sort of take everything to heart. I mean, that's how the whole media is. And one thing I think you will see is a lot of these. So I think globally there is this whole trend now of protests, right, becoming a very big thing. We've seen that in the last decade. We've seen that much more in the Trump years there, right? And I mean, you can just look up a lot of articles on that, right, where they say how protests were a big thing in 2019 and 2020, and this year has started. And I think the whole idea is that, let's say, that progressives or liberals look at this administration unfavorably, right? They think that these are really bad guys. So now protests are a way of sort of bringing attention and sort of staving off whatever is their whole, worst case scenario, right? So the more attention you put on India, the more India is supposed to sort of somehow, the Indian government is supposed to somehow behave properly, right? So let's say one potential thing you could say is that, the Indian police was remarkably restrained on 26th January, actually. The protesters can claim to themselves that, look, we brought all this attention on this thing, and so, people were restrained, right? And that's a win. And if you look at the commentary around, let's say, the anti-CAA protests, I think they feel they did a great job, and, they are successful in many of their aims, right? Because apart from, let's say, they showed solidarity, to India's minorities and, all that, but they also will say that, we've managed to restrain and influence the government action. I mean, the CAA rules haven't been formed yet. The NRC has got sort of pushed back or shelved. There's not much talk of it. So, one could say that that side was also successful in their aims, right? Of, pushing back and slowing down. So this back and forth will keep happening. That temperature escalation will, sort of keep continuing.
Right. So Ashish, aside from the commentary itself, right, what are some key strategic issues that we have to deal with in the US, India-US paradigm? And, related question is, there is this whole anti-China sentiment as well, right? How do we leverage that, utilize that for our gain?
I think the China question is central to the US-India relationship. There's no doubt about that. Also, unfortunately, because the general perception is that the whole Chimerica concept is again kind of rearing its head. Biden administration will supposedly normalize the ties with China, or if it doesn't normalize, it will at least not be as aggressive, as a Trump administration. And that aggression has two parts, Carrie. One is that, of course, the Trump administration was generally against China's rise, right? So, for example, when like a military type conflict happened between China and India, the Trump administration was watching out for. I mean, they wouldn't comment on it, but they were very clear that they would restrain China, or they would at least act on in other ways, right? Like sending one of their some fleets will come in the surrounding ocean and so on. On the South China Sea issue, they were quite aggressive about China not letting China infringe on the territories of other nations and so on. So that was one part of it, where US was quite vocal. That part certainly may be in question under this administration. The second part is, of course, a trade part of it. Now, again, here it doesn't really matter if China, if US continues its tariffs on China or not. I mean, it probably has some business impact, some positive business impact for us. But even if those tariffs are gone, it's all right. Like, we can deal with that in other ways. But the larger issue here is that then will US move towards the Indo-Pacific type construct that we had been building with Japan and Australia? Would that mature? I mean, it's a few years old now, but only in the last couple of years it has come to a point where we are talking about a Indo-Pacific type trade treaty or some kind of a supply chain resiliency initiative, which Japan and Australia have already signed up with India, but US hasn't. So the whole focus on Indo-Pacific, I mean, what, where does that go? I think that is the other question, which is quite relevant both for defense and for trade. Mainly because India was hoping that in this whole Quad type partnership, the US market will open up for us eventually. So I think that remains to be seen. And I think I guess it's a derivative issue for the US. They clearly are not looking for Quad as a primary question. They first will decide what they have to do with China. And depending on the response there, their approach towards Quad will then form up. So yeah, again, I think that is something to watch out for. And I don't think we will have a very early signal there. It might take like a year to settle down. So it's just wait and watch from India's perspective.
Right. Sunanda ji, I'm also curious about, what the Indians in the US think about all of this, right? So what is their perception like? Because historically, I think, Indians in the US are Democratic supporters. And you see the kind of stuff that is being said and stuff, regarding Kashmir and other things. What is the sentiment like among the Desis there?
What you are saying, but aren't saying is there buyer's remorse yet? Yeah. So on a more serious note, this time there wasn't a mostly Indian Americans, as we know, have voted for Democrats, and that has been their stable constituency. This is the first time that I've lived here for 20 years. This is the first time I saw a major fault line in there. And there was a huge Republican constituency as well. And when they fought between each other, they were talking to each other. So no one could say that they have the entire Indian American vote. Now, here's the thing. Indian Americans are just 1% of the population. So it doesn't really change the whole game in that sense. We overemphasize what Indian Americans can do. Maybe they can change the outcome in few counties here or there, in few segments, but overall the way the election is going, they cannot change the election in United States. They're nowhere close to even a state election, forget about the national election. So we overemphasize their faith. But what Indian Americans can do is, because they are a relatively they're a small minority, but they punch above their weight just because of how successful they are and how much money they have. So they are able to fund a lot of politicians, and a lot of people come to them for money. So that dynamics is changed. And unlike United States, unlike India, politicians in United States don't make any, they are literally up for sale. They will tell you that, whoever gives me, and there's no value judgment attached to it. People are very open about it. You pay them money, you get them to do what you want. It is open lobbying. So I will not name this person. I won't even tell you if it's the gender of the person, but in Congress, somebody I know, they're very close to Pakistani caucus. And a lot of Indian Americans went to this person and said, after Osama bin Laden, after 9/11, after everything, can you still sit on the Pakistan caucus and give lectures to India? What are you thinking? And this person clearly over the bat said, you guys just talk. Where is the money? Let the money come in and then we'll talk. And this is not a story that I'm making up. It's true. It is truly about lobbying efforts. And nobody will, think tankers in Washington, D.C. will really squirm before they say this. They will never, ever accept that these people are up for sale, but they are. It is really, lobbying is legal. It is, everything gets lobbied. What I just told you about Kashmir American Day came after series of lobbying. It's people who keep lobbying. Indians have been wary of lobbying. Of course, officially, India does not even indulge in lobbying at all. I mean, we believe in hardcore, muscular diplomacy, between state actors. We do not believe in non-state actors doing that, which may be a bit of mistake in Biden presidency, I'm thinking. Because this presidency is so much about the old days again. I think some of the lobbying really is not, we need to get it out of our mind that lobbying is bad. In United States, lobbying is not bad. Going back to Indian Americans, there was a big I have seen for the first time where they were not agreeing, and India became a huge question. Earlier, it was only about what is my healthcare, what are my jobs, what are H1, what are things. Now that the Indian Americans are mostly doing well in their jobs, they have, they don't have that kind of insecurity, most of them. Now they are beginning to ask that if I support you, how are you going to support India's reform agenda? How are you going to support what India is doing in Kashmir? How are you going to support abrogation of 370? This is very new for Indians. Pakistanis have been doing it forever. Pakistanis will for sure tell you, I will give you my dollar, but you tell me what are you going to do up for me? And that's a very open conversation they have. Indians are very squeezy, very squirmy about it. But it seems that this election changed it. Now people were upfront about saying that, I live in a place called Sugarland in Houston, and it's a suburb of Houston. And, there was an Indian American here who was running for Congress and on a Democrat ticket, Sri Preston Kulkarni, and he lost. But one of the reasons why it seems that he lost is because Indian Americans in this constituency, and there are a lot of Indian Americans here, they actually went up to him and put him on the spot and said, tell us what you think about India's Kashmir policy. Are you going to go and support it in Congress? And this person, of course, had, came from the old school, and he was, I heard that he had said to many people, it was wonderful when you could have Indo-Pak grocery stores and Indo-Pak vote together. Not anymore. After Narendra Modi's ascent, I don't think they will ever be able to club the South Asian vote or India-Pakistani vote together. Or an entire Indian vote together. They will have to fight for Indian vote. As of now, what is happening on Twitter, I see a lot of disenchantment with, especially with the farm laws, with all that is happening on Twitter. Indian Americans feel that Biden presidency has not come down strongly on people who associate themselves with Democrat Party, who are followers of Democrat Party, or who are the foot soldiers of Democrat Party, or who are part of the Democrat Party, and they have come down so heavily on India. And this tweet storm and all that is all associated with Democrat Party and the BLM movement that had its roots in Democrat Party and all that stuff. So they are a little queasy about it, and they're not happy about the fact that nobody from the government is saying anything. And I think it's not going to happen anytime soon. I don't think you will see any kind of admonishment from the US establishment to these people. It will have to be dealt at that way. And as I said, we will have to separate policy making from social media. Biden presidency allows us to do it. Trump presidency did not. Thankfully, we did well in Trump presidency on social media. But in Biden presidency, we will have to tell ourselves that social media is different from policy making. Battles are not won on social media here and there. It will be won on the on the diplomatic tables. That's right. Where I see what's happening.
Right. So let's reverse the gaze a little bit and talk about what the government here should do with the Biden administration. Right. So Abhishek, your thoughts on this? What are 3 things that you would like for the Modi government to do specifically?
So one sort of common ground which is there between, let's say, PM Modi's agenda and the Democrats, which was not there in the previous one, is on climate, right? I think Joe Biden's administration will be very big on, they've rejoined the Paris Accord, and they will be making their whatever changes and investments and trying to reorient their own economy as well towards climate friendly approach, unlike the previous one. And while we are not ideological about it, I mean, we in India understand that, right? That we have to ourselves, be positive on that front, right? So that is one easy area of cooperation, and I see that will be prominently pushed, at least by our side, right? As our commitment, not just to the US, but also, the overall global community in general. So that's one. I think Trump also was kind of, so he was sort of erratic on trade, right? He sort of made a lot of comments about, high tariffs and Harley Davidson bikes, attracting the big tariffs and all that. So I think trade is the next issue where, India and America can now sort of deal with. Trump had actually brought in a protectionist turn there, right? In terms of primarily China, but they were reversing the whole sort of free market philosophy over the years, right? So that's where another thing where I think Biden will sort of try to rejoin possibly other, trading blocks. And also there is a potential for, an India-US trade deal, if not immediately, probably a 12, 18 month sort of time frame. The other one, I don't know if it's an area of cooperation or not, but this issue will sort of feature prominently, and that is big tech, right? So big tech is facing a lot of pressure in the US for two different reasons from both the sides. The right is primarily concerned about freedom of speech, right? And whether platform versus publisher and those kind of things, right? So that's where the Republican side comes at it, and they have been vociferous about it, especially after what happened, with Twitter taking down Donald Trump's account and all that. So that's one angle. But the Democrats, on the other hand, have been big on pushing on the anti-monopoly angle, right? And parts of the left are very much against a lot of the big tech companies, whether it is Amazon or Google or Facebook, and there is big pressure on that front, right? And now, given, the repercussions of this also come on to us, right? With what is happening, there was a hashtag running last night, and I think Aashish and I mean, we were not sure what is actually happening, or ban Twitter in India and all that. But the point is, very soon, these decisions will have sort of come up, right? Where what does a government do to social media giants and big tech, right? In terms of who has what powers, right? Whether these companies have to follow Indian law, like the question itself has now come up, right? Where the government has asked certain accounts or whatever tweets to be taken down, and after some time they've reviewed and come up with a different conclusion. So the question is now, how do you get people to follow Indian law, whether that is there or not? So this question will sort of go back and forth, and suppose the view in India comes to be that we have to be hard on them and make them follow the law. That's where you could see a pushback as well. So we don't know exactly on which side the US will eventually take on this. So it's a very sort of evolving and dynamic situation when it comes to social media and big tech.
Yeah, so two things, right? I think one is that, we are going to get a lot more Atmanirbhar on the technology platform media front for sure, right? I mean, at least that's what the trend indicates. right? And opposing that trend is the fact that I don't think Google, Facebook, or any of the other, Amazon even, has much of love lost in the Congress in any sense, right? I don't think the US as a policy will back these guys against, let's say, India saying that you have to follow our rules or pay our taxes or hire X number of people here in local offices, etc. So yeah, that's actually an interesting thing. Ashish, on that note, I come to you. So what is your 3-point wish list for Prime Minister Modi in terms of dealing with the US?
Yeah, I think Abhishek touched upon that, but I'll abstract it to say that we should become more transactional. We should identify the areas where we can just engage US as a as either as a market or as someone who can help them drive their agenda, right? So climate definitely is one of that. And good thing is India should do nothing different here. We're already working on it from our own perspective and in our own interests. So there's nothing extra to be done. Maybe perhaps we may have to open up the market a little bit for the US companies, etc., which is fine, or for US capital, which is okay. We anyway need capital to drive some of the growth any which way in the whole renewable space, in the climate space. So I think that we need to find 2 or 3 such hooks where we can basically be seen as aligned to what President Biden wants to do, right? So that would be one area. Second thing, as Sunanda said, like we will need to create and cultivate our independent foreign policy, but a softer part of it in terms of be it lobbying or be it using cultivating non-state actors, or like if just to simplify stuff, this is probably oversimplification, but let's say if there are 5 celebrities tweeting about something anti-India, can we get 5 celebrities to talk pro-India? So who those 5 people are, like, can we identify them and cultivate them? They may not do this next month, but they might do it 2 years from now, right? So it will take some effort and some, basically, it's like a outreach program. To be fair, most Americans have no clue about what India is, right? So like their perceptions may also be getting built from what they are reading in NYT or WAPO, or unfortunately the more vicious stuff like Atlantic or Vice and stuff like that. So the point is you got to manage that perception whichever way. And that will need some investment in terms of creating your own media platforms or think tanks, or at least aligning think tanks broadly what already are there in the US, right? So basically get them on our side. And in the US, money works, as Sunanda already said. So I think that it's not that, it's less ideological in that sense. It's probably more commercial, transactional discussion. So it is doable, but it will need, let's say, 2-3 years of effort, and that has to be taken care of. The third thing I would say is that the whole narrative issue, I think Twitter, etc. My sense is that we should probably take a lead here in terms of how this will be managed. What's going to happen is that if, let's say, another 50 countries succumb to the way Twitter is trying to create a supranational kind of a government territorial, a digital territory of its own, the challenge is that we will not be able to react very fast after 1 or 2 years, right? So if our, see, I think in India, this whole publisher platform thing is useless because the publishers are also self-regulated, and we already see what's happening with the TV media and what. So let's say if Twitter says, okay, fine, I'm a newspaper. Now do what? Now what? So nothing. You can't do anything to newspapers either, right? Per se. In terms of towing a given line or even following Indian rules for that matter. Forget towing a line. So I think this is a theoretical debate for India. It's probably more relevant in the US from a commercial perspective in terms of what they can do as an advertiser and so on. But I think India is far behind on that.
The broadcasting laws. Sorry, the broadcasting laws are much stricter there for publishers per se, right? So I think there it's of some consequence. Here, well, maximum fine that I know of is about 4 or 5 lakhs, and that too after multiple rounds of inquiry and stuff like that by their own panels.
Yeah, if you try to put people in jail for 7 years for not following a government order, it looks good, muscular, but the challenge is, then you'll fight just that for next 2-3 years, right? In terms of media perception. So the point is that you have to do something about it. What that is, I don't know right now, but basically create a national framework of how the digital platforms operate in India, right? I think that needs to be done ahead of how it gets misused by anyone in the Biden administration. That's like an insurance that we need to watch out for ourselves and protect our own interests.
Right. All right. Final comments to you, Sunanda ji. What do you think that India should do in this Biden administration?
I think India should, 2 or 3 things that I would say that India should do. I totally agree with Aashish when he says on climate. That is a huge thing for Biden administration, and they've already put John Kerry in control of that. And John Kerry knows India very well, knows the Indian establishment very well. We have dealt with him before. So I think on climate, we should totally take a lead, because we've shown it in Solar Alliance, we have shown it everywhere else. I think on climate, India needs to tell United States that this is how we do it. And United States is facing a lot of trouble at home with oil companies, very, very upset. I mean, Texas and all, oil companies, big oil companies like Shell and all have gone on record to say that we feel like tobacco companies overnight. So they have a lot of pushback at home. So it is something that India can take a lead in. Second, I would really like to take for India to take a lead on China as well. And we've already done it. Think about it. China is the only, I mean, India is the only country that actually at that point stood up against this, help me, I'm losing my train of thought here. What they have in the POK and Baluchistan and all that. Help me recall that. India has already stood up against that.
And India has Doklam standoff?
Yeah, not Doklam standout, but India has already stood up against China with all the Chinese economic imperialism.
Okay, Belt and Road.
But we are either
Belt and Road Initiative. I'm having the
CPEC more specifically, the China-Pakistan Economic
Belt and Road Initiative. India is the only country that stood up against everyone and said that we see the economic imperialism and economic oppression that China is indulging in, even though United States at that point did support China. So I think on China, we can take a huge lead again to show the world that we have suffered at the hands of China the way nobody else has. And we can see China for what it is. And we can see that China's rise is not very benign. On that, India can take a lead. And we have an excellent foreign minister who understands China policy very well. I think between India and United States, he is one of the most learned men who has spent time on China and who can guide this policy very well. On third, I think Indian Americans need to take a lead. I think Indian Americans need to, like the Jewish diaspora, I think Indian Americans need to form the diaspora where they will finally, talk about what it is what is in the Indian interest, and the Indian interest and their voting pattern should somehow reflect in that. And there is no shame in doing that. I mean, Jewish diaspora has been doing it all the time. And so this is on, Indian diaspora to do it. So there's nothing that Indian government can do about it. That is for them to do it. And I hope and I wish India indulges in a bit of lobbying on the Hill. It has been my pet peeve. It has never happened before, and it's wonderful that we are dealing with muscular diplomacy. But overall, Americans understand lobbying quite a bit, and I wish we indulge with lobbying. And it's not a bad word. It's a way. The reason that you see all these op-eds in New York Times and Washington Post, don't be under the impression that this is happening just because somebody took an editorial call on it. Or somebody came to India and did research for 5 years, and after that they took that stand. Don't be under that impression. This is totally a lobbying being done on the Hill and with the media and everything. So if a op-ed by Imran Khan gets published by New York Times, it takes New York Times about 3 weeks to publish a rebuttal by Indian ambassador even. It It took 3 weeks to even publish a rebuttal by us. What does that show? I mean, Indian ambassador is the highest ranking highest ranking diplomat and highest ranking official in the United States. At that time, it was Ambassador Shringla. It took them 3 weeks to publish a rebuttal. And Economic Times, after Kashmir happened August 5th and revocation of Article 370, Ambassador Jaishankar wrote in Financial Times and in other newspapers in the United States, and yet the way it took 3 or 4 weeks for even that to get published. So I think for that we need a bit of lobbying here, and one has been hoping that Indian government understands that as well. Those are my 3 points: climate, China, and I think outreach to through other channels other than diplomatic channels.
Right. Yeah, I think there's pretty much consensus on that front, right? I mean, if anything, I think the events of last week prove that true ideological conviction is rarer than turn or bounce on the chakak pitch, I think.
There is zero ideological convention. We should not even get into those fights. American right is not Indian right. American left is not Indian left. I have got gray hair now trying to explain to people that. There is zero convergence on right and left there and right and left here. There is absolutely nothing ideological about it. People don't understand. Anytime they say Hindu nationalist and Hindu right, they don't even understand what that means. They just throw labels, and we should not even worry about those things. There is absolutely, we should not get into ideological fights. This is a transactional thing. Deal with it that way.
Right.
Americans understand business more than they understand anything else. Trump was just upfront about it, and he told you because he was a businessman and he did not hide it. But it's Biden. With Biden presidency, it's no different. So be transactional about it. Tell them, here is the give and take. We give you this, you give us this, and this is how it goes. We're not going to get into anything more than that. You want help on China? So here is how you get it.
All right, fantastic. So that brings us to the end of what was a fascinating podcast. Thank you so much for your insightful views, Sunanda ji, Abhishek and Aashish. I guess it'll be interesting to wait and watch how this all pans out, and maybe, hopefully we'll do an update soon enough on this. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.